Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Schools Forum for our, I think, second meeting of the year. And apologies for absence.
Through you, Chair, we have apologies for absence from Lee Hughes and Andrew Reid.
Thank you. Thanks, James. And changes to forum membership?
Through you, Chair, we have Ian Massey has left the forum as a result of changing his position. He with his school, he was an academy mainstream representative, and Karen Lewis has also retired, so has left her position as an academy special representative. We will be making efforts following this meeting to fill those gaps as far as possible.
Super, thank you. I'd like to invite members of forum for any declarations of interest. I've got one I'd like to declare that might come up later, is that as East Midlands Academy Trust, I'm Deputy CEO of, we have a PFI school. And so any discussions around PFI, I'd like to declare that as an interest. Are there any other declarations of interest, Dan? Same for that, thanks. Okay, minutes of last meeting. You've all had opportunity to look at the minutes. Is there any questions anyone's got on them? Anything you're not sure about, Dan? Beth? Are these coming up later in the agenda, those 3 points that Dan's, well, Beth's one for you. Yeah, okay. Okay, well, I'll, if there's no other questions in relation to the minutes, I'll sign the minutes on behalf of the forum. And if I can ask Emily, if we move on to DSG monitoring, please.
Yep, so the paper outlines the forecast outturn for the 24-25 financial year that's been prepared at period 4, which is July 2024. We provide a quick recap of the last financial year's provisional outturn, which was reported to the Council's Cabinet in June and Schools Forum in July. So there was an overspend across the DSG of 4.1 million, which equates to approximately 1% of the gross budget and approximately 3% of the net budget. So the cumulative deficit that we carried forward into this financial year across the DSG is 1 million. However, within this, there is a 6.2 million deficit balance on the high needs block. And so like many councils, West Northamptonshire are seeing significant increases in demand and costs for statutory services. And within SEND, demand-led pressures are above average. So the forecast outturn that's currently being estimated for the current financial year across the DSG is an overspend of 12.1 million, which is mainly due to demand pressures on the high needs block, which is forecast to overspend by 12.3 million. The overspend on the high needs block is formed of approximately 6 million structural deficit. So that is inherent demand and the full year effect of it from prior years over and above the funding increase in the high needs block. Related to that point, as in prior years, West Northamptonshire is among the lowest funded compared to regional and national benchmarks. And we've recently seen increases at the bottom end of the percentage uplift through the high needs national funding formula. But even if we did receive the maximum 5% uplift through the High Needs National Funding Formula, this still wouldn't have been enough to even cover the structural deficit before even accounting for any in-year growth and demand. So the remaining overspend within the high needs block is due to growth and demand and increased average costs. And the total overspend is mainly due to provision for pupils with SEN in local schools, with 4 million forecast overspend in mainstream schools, which represents some of the increased investment through the RAS. As in prior years, we've got a forecast overspend of 1.7 million on independent placements budget. The total forecast expenditure on independent placements is 18.8 million, which is compared to 18.3 million last financial year and 15.8 million the year before. So we are starting to see some of that growth in independent placements slowing down, whilst it's still obviously a problem. In addition to the SEND demand, AP is forecast to overspend by 3.5 million, and this is due to the increases in the number of exclusions. All of the above means that the cumulative deficit on the DSG is forecast to be to increase from 1 million this carried forward into this financial year to 13.5 million. However, within this, the cumulative deficit on the high needs block is 18.5 million. So the paper also talks about the national issues around SEND funding. So since actually writing the paper, there have been some more up-to-date articles that suggest the national SEND deficit is actually closer to 4 billion, rising to 5.9 billion over the next financial year. So obviously West Northants are part of the F40 group, which is continuously lobbying government about SEND funding. And there was a recent submission that was informed by some West Northants feedback by the County Council's network. So there was a response to the budget and spending review consultation, which called on government to provide immediate clarity and a national solution on how the Treasury intends to deal with high needs deficits. Obviously, we've got in place currently a statutory deficit, a statutory override, which allows us to ring fence our deficits away from our Council General Fund, but that is due to currently expire at the end of March 26. So with the sort of budget announcements that are due at the end of this month, we hope to have an update on that.
Thank you, Emily. Her forum members got questions for Emily. Oh, Fiona.
I just wanted to assure forum members that the F40 group, which you know I'm a member of, we were in Westminster last week approaching the new government to explain to them exactly what our situation was. So I can only say we'll keep on talking about it in the hope that they do recognise the situation that we're all in.
Thank you. Thanks, Fiona. Dan.
No.
Thanks for the question, Dan. And just to do the second question really quickly, that £34 million is the whole programme. So that includes the Tiffield Big Special School and other expansions. I know we've talked here before about 600 places we create. It's actually going to be more about 650 additional specialist places, which we know will help. but is not the answer to the problem that we currently face. It's part of the answer, I think. In terms of the wider bit, we have seen over 40% increase in plans issued. We have seen a nearly 50% increase in requests for statutory assessment. And that's down to a number of factors. That is higher than most other local areas, but it's not massively higher. We know this is a picture that we're seeing nationally. We see far too many requests from parents. So over a third of the requests for statutory assessment come from parents. And what parents tell us is they are not comfortable with the quality of education their children are currently receiving. So that is something we need to work on, and we as a system need to work on. We have an approach there that we think will make a huge difference in terms of the investment the council has made in specialist members of staff to work with settings and to work with parents. We have also seen, and this is, I'm not going to say a victim of success because it isn't success yet, but I've talked a number of times here about the investment that the council has made in additional educational psychologists and additional staff, which means we are completing more assessments, which mean more plans are being issued, which is good. So there was a real backlog of plans that we were not issuing anywhere near on time. We have nearly cleared that backlog now. So there was always going to be an increase because there was a load of young people waiting for assessments, for advices that now have plans issued. So a lot of work to do there, a lot of work to convince and assure parents that local provision is right for their children. We sadly are seeing a big increase in tribunals, and most people will know the percentages of tribunals that are awarded in parents' favours nationally. It's up in 90%. A lot of those tribunals are naming specialist places for children. That's putting a huge pressure on the budget. So it's a number of factors. It's not one easy fix at all. There's a lot that we all need to do to try and address that. And our last comment, and I know I've shared this in a number of forums recently, we still see the highest number of requests for statutory assessment in Year 6. So a lot of this is around transition from primary to secondary. And a lot of this, I know this is an anecdotal, but the evidence backs this up. A lot of this is around anxiety of children leaving a very small contained site, going onto a great big secondary site, and parents and those children not being comfortable with that transition. That is leading to more requests. That is also leading to more children being either electively home educated or missing their education around that transition point. So there's a huge amount of work we need to do collectively to address that.
Are we?
Yeah, Eliza, we are looking at that from both angles, from the primary looking up and from the secondary looking down. You will know we've just recruited a team of specialist teachers who are all expert Senkos. We're very, very pleased with the calibre of people that we've got. We have just appointed a manager of that team as well, who will start with us in January. So we're looking at how we can improve transition. And the idea about those colleagues is they are out working with leaders in schools, looking at what those concerns are and what is needed to try and address those concerns to improve that transition.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. Yeah, very happy to bring that data to the next meeting here. I think that will probably lead to a further conversation that might not actually be for schools forum. That might be more around practice as well. But obviously, I'm happy to bring that information here.
Thank you. Thanks, Del. Has anyone else got any questions? Emily, for this? No? Okay. Well, I say it's a bleak picture.
Not
Yep.
responding to a question, just adding to Emily's overview, which paints a bleak picture. Just to reassure, this is the picture that's happening nationally at the moment. So we are by no means the worst council at the moment in terms of that pressure on our high needs block. Emily mentioned a figure, which I think is an easy figure to throw in, but when you look at it, it's really scary. £4 billion overspend for councils at the moment around SEND. And from the chief executive of the council and from obviously our elected members, this is becoming the biggest issues for councils at the moment. Not just from a financial point of view, but that understanding of if we don't get this right for children who are vulnerable with additional needs now, we set those children up for a life where they will struggle. So we know we've got to invest now. The statutory override is petrifying. That will bankrupt councils if that's removed, and it not some 25-30+% more of councils would go bust overnight. So the latest report that I'm sure most colleagues have seen, which was a national research report around the SEND system, which was commissioned to ISOS to produce. It's a fantastic, really evidence-based piece of a report that talks about the only way out of this situation is top-down reform. This has to be policy and top-down reform. No local system can get out of this safely and appropriately. What we are not going to do, and this council is not going to do it, is just start cutting provision for our most vulnerable children to balance the books. So we are working with and challenging central government around what that top-down reform needs to look like. I must admit, I agree. I thought that report was very, very clear in its advice and its recommendations. So I think that's given us a really helpful steer, and I hope in the budget and subsequently we will see some solutions coming centrally to this.
Thank you, Ben. The only other comment I got, which I'd like to ask Emily, is what degree of confidence have you got in the forecast? Because previous years we've come along, we've started with the budget, very shortly afterwards it's gone west, and then has been a really declining picture. Are we confident that we have the right forecast?
Obviously the forecasts are based on the best information that we have to hand at a point in time. The period 4 forecast, I will say, has stayed fairly stable since we've obviously reported that. We're next due to report to Cabinet in December along with the draft budget, so we'll bring the update to Schools Forum then. There's obviously going to be risk because there's lots of moving parts because we've got a backlog clearance ongoing, and then we've obviously got the implementation of the RAS, for which we think we've captured a lot of the part year impact of that coming into this financial year. Obviously I'm not going to say that it's not going to deteriorate, but at the moment the forecast has been fairly stable, but obviously a demand-led budget is going to be sort of subject to change, and there will be some risk around it.
Chair, just to add to Emily's point, we are meeting with the Education Skills Funding Agency in about a month's time, less than a month now, about 3 weeks' time. Because of the nature of our overspend, we are not a local area that is in safety valve or delivering better value at all. But what they want to see from us is a recovery plan for how we are going to get that high needs block down and back within budget. In order to really pull that detail together, the council has appointed an officer to come and lead that piece of work, who has got a lot of experience in safety valve and delivering better value. Very, very knowledgeable. Emily and a couple of other colleagues met with her last week. She's only interim and short period of time, but she will help pull a plan together, and I fully expect she will come to this meeting in the future to talk about what that recovery plan looks like. She's absolutely the right person to do that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Ben. Any more questions? No? Then if we move on, Beth, I think it is agenda item 5.
Thank you. So this is the schools budget consultation in draft that we bring to you at Schools Forum in October each year, so that you have a chance to input into the questions that we're asking, or to have anything else added as options, or to give us feedback, really. It's a bit of an unusual year, as you're probably aware, that we haven't had the national funding formula released in July, and we haven't had a provisional DSG allocation in July, which we normally have. And that normally provides us a summer with which to do some modelling and to come up with more sort of impacts on individual budgets for different proposals. So we don't have that because of the new government. We're told there'll be an announcement shortly after the budget on the 30th or 31st of October. So for that reason, this is very much draft, but we've kind of got the same usual culprits in the areas that we're looking at. We're asking about the transfer from the schools block to the high needs block of the 0.5%. So that's the sort of a top slice, would effectively be the regular top slice to schools and academies budgets before calculating their national funding formula. There's the growth fund, which is the other part of the schools block, which would essentially act as a kind of top slice for the schools and academies national funding formula. And also there are two parts to that growth fund as usual. There's the weighted numbers, and we have to agree with schools forum. That's a schools forum decision that they vote on accepting those, and also the overall growth fund. There are the de-delegations, and also, sorry, going back to the schools block, we're asking the question of how you want the overall schools block to be balanced. And we're suggesting that we use the capping as we have done in previous years. So this is just to give schools a chance to comment on that. So those are the factors that affect schools and academies. Then we have the de-delegations, which only affect the maintained schools, as a top slice to just the maintained schools for specific services. And we have 3 of those: the trade union facility time, school improvement grant, and the redundancy support. I think you'll see from the table within the section on the trade union facility time that we expect to fully utilise the carry forward, which is double the current year budget. So if you look at the table in that section for the current year 24-25, you'll see that it's suggesting. Oh, sorry. So that's, I can hear it now, it's echoing. Yeah. So that's kind of that 24-25 year is showing that we're going to have to do something different with the facility, the trade union facility time. And we're currently in discussions with the reps and working through that. So that section will probably change with different options before we actually publish in November. Then we have a section on the notional send budgets, and that's just to ask for feedback. We're not proposing any changes. I did think possibly by this year that would become part of the national hard funding formula, because it seemed to be moving in that direction when we were setting it for 24-25, and we were asked or instructed that we had to consult on it for 24-25. But obviously, because there's that delay to the national funding formula information, we don't have that. There's no indication that will be a hard fixed formula imposed on us. So it's really just a question about our local formula again. We have had one small release of information on the national funding formula from government, which is to say that the overall structure, the elements are staying the same. And there are some minor changes to the PFI, which are for those authorities where PFIs are ending in year, which doesn't apply to us. But then I think good news that the PFI changes and split site funding changes, if there are any for schools, that any increases would actually be received in full and not capped. They'd be outside of any cap. So those I think are largely familiar subject areas, and happy to take any questions and hear feedback on what people would like in that consultation.
I'll get my teacher voice, project it a bit more. Sorry, table 6.2, the annual rates for teachers in both primary and secondary, are they taking into consideration potential 5.5%?
No, we haven't put any proposal forward to increase them, which is sort of looking back. We don't generally do an annual increase every year, but if it's something you want us to look at modelling, obviously then that means that top slice on the schools block is bigger.
Yeah, I just think
but it's
that
not,
will be a question,
not,
won't it, for schools that are going through that growth modelling, that teachers are going to cost and support staff are going to cost, potentially going to cost more. It was just a question more.
Yeah,
I said
so
more,
no-
more,
no,
more
it's
than
not.
anything else. Thank you. And then the second thing is you just mentioned, just for, because I'm a very simple person. So the, on table 8.1, which is around trade union duties. So just to clarify, there may be additional options. You're still in discussion with trade union representatives, and that potentially is going to see options increase in terms of cost per pupil.
Yeah, I think it will be proposals with an increased cost, because you can see very clearly that it's cost us 3 times more because of the carry forward that was used to fund the service this year than we had in the budget.
Okay, and then the mechanism for putting that out, how will that go out through? How do you want that to be presented to maintained colleagues?
So that we will work up on those options over the next week with the trade union reps and aim to put it in this consultation when it goes out in
Okay.
November.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I've got one question, Beth. I think you touched on it, but I wanted to check with the consultation, when we're looking at transferring money and that results in a cap or a change in the minimum funding, in the past, we've had funding come through for PFIs. And when it's come through, because the PFI costs have gone through the roof, I think down with 18% a couple of years ago and around about 10 recently, the funding, there is an increase in funding, but that then got scaled back by the cap. Is the proposal for that to happen again, or should we be consulting to say that any changes in PFI funding stick with the lump sum elements or stick with the premises elements and don't form part of the cap? Because otherwise you continually year after year penalising PFI schools who have no control over the costs are going up, and the only small relief we've got in those schools is the income that comes in.
Yeah, that's going to be part of the formula that we can't change locally. So the government have announced that that's a change to the national funding formula, that they will exclude. So the minimum funding guarantee calculation, which does the floor and the cap protection and capping, that will, through this, the tool that they give us, the app, it will be built in that we can't change it. They will be excluded from that capping process.
Okay.
And just to add as well, that not every school with a PFI increase was capped. It just depends on where the level of the cap was as to all the other increases that they got per pupil.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And there's the so that is a difference to this year, so we don't need to concern ourselves.
Yes, that's right. It will
that.
be there. We don't need to consult on it.
I'm sure PFI schools will be happier with that anyway. Thank you. Is there any other questions in relation to this report and the proposals for consultation? No? In which case, I would, I think the basis of the consultation, I think everyone's happy with. Thank you. Thanks, Beth.
Chair, just to check, is that with the addition of Mr. York's point about including modelling impact of a 5.5% increase?
Yes, because I don't think you can do that at the moment.
Yeah, I don't think you were suggesting we do that, were you?
No.
No.
I have got one other question on the we talked about the on page 41 of the pack, consultation questions. On question 15, I think it's 15.2. I'm not sure whether the question was quite clear on that one. The total amount of schools' individual budgets have to be balanced to the available grant. Do you agree with the proposal to balance the schools' individual budget shares to the available grant application by applying a cap and increase the same percentage? When I had to read it 2 or 3 times before I kind of understood what it was asking, whether it was clear, whether the question was clear for consultees.
Yeah, I totally get that point, and it's almost, it could do with a paper in its own right to explain the alternatives. Because the alternatives are things like reducing the ORPU, reducing other elements like free school meals, which would then, or the other elements like the overall minimum per pupil funding, and those would all have different impacts depending on your particular school's characteristics. So it's very difficult, but other authorities, they do model it to you know, when you've got an app tool to model with, which we don't this year. But there are things we could do to show differences and examples of how that might flow through. So there are different ways of bringing it into balance. So I think I'm sort of saying it needs a whole paper on it, partly to explain why there might be a need to balance it, and whether we took 0.5% or didn't, or whether we had a large need for growth funding or didn't, you can still need to apply a cap, because you could have local business rates and NDR might be higher than the national funding formula figures, which are historical, what they're using. So although it might not look from the national funding formula published school budgets that we need to apply a cap, the actual reality of where our figures are very often mean you do still need to bring it into balance, either through reducing all of the different formula elements or by applying a blanket per pupil increase. So yeah, I take your point. I'm very happy to perhaps work with people to try and get that clearer.
Sorry, Chair, just to add on to that, I think the whole point of consultation, as we've seen previously and we discussed with Andy, is consultation, we want engagement from head teachers, don't we? And I think sometimes that can, if you're not necessarily that way inclined, the engagement may not necessarily be there, and therefore we're making decisions not on a fair representation of all colleagues. So yeah, I could absolutely echo what the Chair said. In any way we can increase engagement, I think ultimately head teachers want to see what it means to them in many respects, which I know is an impossible task. But if we're able to really kind of demonstrate it the best we possibly can, I think we're going to increase engagement, and therefore, you know, ultimately the voting decisions that Eliza and I make for maintain primaries is going to be a fairer reflection, isn't it? The more schools we have engaged in the consultation.
Yeah. So are you suggesting that you'd like to see some kind of more detail on what that means within the document, perhaps a bigger section explaining that capping, or would you like to see some sort of modelling using the prior year figures?
I think what head teachers want to see is what it means to them, don't they? And I said, I appreciate that's an impossible task and one that would take forever. Maybe it's around, you know, just how you simplify the information for head teachers to understand it. I know that sounds really kind of, but yeah, like
yeah,
you
no,
read that
it is,
question.
I'm trying to shove a lot into one.
Yeah, and that's what I said. Reading it,
yeah,
to digest that and then to understand what it actually means and what you want from that question, I think is, you know, as I said, might be difficult. I don't know if Eliza, you can.
I mean, maybe just some examples of what it would look like in a school of this size and this size. That would probably relate to head teachers.
Yeah, I think where that gets difficult is that it's very often dependent on, yeah, lots of different factors. So for example, in 1 year where we've had a lot of funding put into the deprivation characteristics, then you'll have a school of a particular size from an area with no deprivation, they wouldn't hit the cap. Whereas a school with very high deprivation, because they've had their increases through those formula funding parts, they would see more likely to see a cap. So it's kind of so many variables within the funding formula that it's how many examples would you show? I mean, I can sort of say, you can give kind of examples of if a school's overall per pupil amount increases, then this is how it would affect. But then to give that same example where it's just reducing their ORPU, it depends on how it interacts with all the other factors within the formula.
But I think even just saying that will help head teachers understand that.
Okay, so maybe an expanded paragraph.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely, it's an impossible task, isn't it? In many ways, I think we're acknowledging that that's the case. It's just really just understanding what the question's asking in the best possible way, I think, put it, you know.
Yeah. I've got one other question on the, because it's all part of the same paper, on the de-delegations. Generally speaking, I was looking at the school improvement grant, and there's a lot of information in the paper about how the de-delegations or how the school improvement grant has helped and how the schools maintain schools trajectories looks very good. Do we do customer satisfaction surveys to support
I'll
about
have to hand
support
that over
received? Any
to Ben.
feedback? You know, have you found that useful? You know,
Have we locked this Ben around?
I
Disappeared.
don't think it's, yeah, from a maintained schools perspective, there's not been a mechanism
No, there hasn't been a
to me in
mechanism for
terms of what that
feedback.
looks like from a maintained school, so.
And also the nature of that support depends on where you are in the Ofsted window
Mhm.
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So I do think some sort of mechanism to feedback would be really useful.
perhaps that's something we can.
Feedback.
Yes. Yeah, if well, we can note an action, Ben, to look at that and then feedback to the next forum meeting, which will be where we'll have had consultation responses as well back. So that will give us a combined picture of how we move forward with that.
Thank you. Yeah, look at that.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then I propose we considered and commented on the proposed consultation, and then we'll see at the next meeting the results of the consultation and where we decide decisions from then, and hopefully we will have some form of national funding formula and budgets by that point. Look at. So, Rihanna, the early years funding, would you like to take us through?
Part of item 6 on the early years funding formula 2025-26. This paper's really outlines our responsibility to consult arrangements around the early years funding formula with early years providers. And as Beth's already talked about a little earlier on, we haven't got sort of our DSG announcements for the early years funding formula, and therefore there's a whole delay on our process. One of the things that we are kind of hoping that School Forum will look at today is, again, we're seeking approval to proceed with an overarching theme around what we propose to do and the principles of the kind of funding formula for 25-26. And there's some key areas that I'll highlight that we are proposing, but essentially we intend to do some modelling for the consultation that we want to do in November, but we haven't got any indicative figures at the moment. The kind of key areas that we want to highlight was really that with the expansion entitlement taking place, we're dealing with, I suppose, an additional 3,202 children as part of the expansion that was introduced in April 2024 for the 2-year-old working entitlements, and additionally in September for the under 2s. So we've had a really good take up nationally. The take up is about 45%, and for West Northampton, we're at about 50% of our families are taking up the under 2s and 2-year-old entitlement. Table 1 just kind of gives some of the validation kind of data on what the summer 24 has looked like and what autumn 24 has looked like. So there is a real high demand for the actual entitlements, and the sector has been really under a lot of pressure in terms of helping the local authority meet that demand. As part of the consultation, we want, I suppose, what we would like to be able to do is not delay the consultation process. And if the kind of indicative figures are coming out in December, we feel like it would be really too late to be able to consult the sector. And so in principle, there's some key themes that we've got that we would like to share with the sector outlined in the paper in order to proceed with consulting and seeking views, and if there's any additional questions that need to go in there or clarity as part of the consultation process. So one of the key, if I kind of pinpoint the kind of main points, in summary for the proposals, we continue to want to retain 5% centrally, so pass through 95% of the total budget for 3 and 4-year-olds. There is a proposal to also retain a 5% for the under 2s and the 2-year-old funding, and we're willing to have some discussion around scoping that and modelling that. In 2024 and 25, we didn't introduce a deprivation rate for the under 2s or the 2-year-olds because actually we didn't have much data to model that on. But one of the things that we are proposing is that for the 25-26 budget, to actually add an element or supplement for the deprivation for under 2s and 2-year-olds. And in terms of targeted SEND funding, we don't have any changes within the funding formula, so it's the same funding formula. However, in line with the expansion of the entitlements being extended to 9-month-old children, we would like to also widen the eligibility criteria to include 9-month-old children. In principle, I suppose, we've talking about the central budget. I mean, we're at a real, we're at a transformation point in terms of developing the early years team and training and development around it, but there is a lot more pressure around the number of children that we're administering and monitoring as part of the payment process. So in total, we've got an additional 1,699 children in April for the under 2, for September for the under 2s, and for 2-year-olds, an additional 1,623 children in terms of the 2-year-old working. So the take-up's really high. In terms of the deprivation supplement, what we're proposing is the same funding formula that we have in place for the 3 and 4-year-olds, based on the IDACHI funding formulas for the under 30%. In terms of, as I said before, for targeted SEND funding, there is no change to the funding formula, but it is about recognising that younger children are entitled to being able to tap into the inclusion funding. So it's about extending the sort of eligibility. For the maintained nursery school supplement, we're proposing to continue to distribute the 100% of the maintained nursery school supplementary funding directly to mainstream nursery schools, in that, as outlined previous years. And any adjustment to the maintained nursery supplement, that as part of the July adjustment, will be applied to indicative rates in 2025-26. There are no changes to disability access funding, but we do recognise that the take-up's really low. So we'd like to work a little bit closer with family hubs to be able to increase the take-up and our support staff really within early years SEND. In terms of the proposed consultation questions, we've listed 6 questions that we'd like to seek views on if people feel they're appropriate or worded appropriately, to highlight the kind of changes that we've proposed. But in essence, what we're really asking for is if we can go to consultation, it would just mean that actually we'll be prepared to be able to bring back the findings for the December. And if actually we start a consultation process a lot later, it could restrict the amount of time we have to consult the sector. Although I can appreciate that for the sector, this is really challenging not to be able to see the indicative rates, you know, and I completely appreciate that. From a sustainability point of view, it's really essential. But I'd rather go to the sector earlier to kind of outline what our principles are in order to feed into that process, as opposed to delay the process and it be tokenistic almost, do the consultation a bit later on.
Questions before members? Richard.
I actually agree. I think it's a good thing to go to consultation before, because I think historically we've been behind on that, and I think it's a good idea. I don't know which bit I start on really. I think it's we knew it was coming around the 95%. There was sort of talk about it that you know, passing over 100% for the, you know, 2s and under 2s wasn't gonna last. But I guess so. There's a couple of things for me. You normally send this report this report with the consultation as well, as an explanation. Will you be doing that again this year?
Yeah, we'd have to do a little bit of more detailed sort of explanation around that. It's
Okay.
a slightly different document.
Right, okay. It was just that there was a bit of inconsistency in terms of the what you put in the proposal around 95% and 97%. It isn't in the questions. Oh, it's in the questions, but it's not in that reporting. I think what providers would be really, it would be helpful for providers is if there was some modelling based on the current rates, so that we have an idea of what that looks like in terms of monetary value and what we're looking at facing cut-wise. And I think that if we're more informed from that side, it helps us make a decision on what we're voting for. Obviously, you know, we don't want to cut, and we hope that budgets are going to, I'm assuming, we're hoping that there's going to be an uplift on budgets in December.
I mean, we're hoping, but at the moment, I'll be honest with you, Rach, we've had to do additional headcounts in November, which are just due for the under twos and the 2-year-olds, and we submitted an additional kind of headcount in September, I think. No, sorry, June, to look at the take up for the 2-year-old working. So I think, in essence, the government's there are going to be some adjustments, but the positive thing is our take up's been really good. So hopefully that will be something that will be a positive thing. But in terms of the actual uplift, I have got no idea. We're waiting for some announcements and some further briefings in the next week or two. So as soon as we know, we'll cascade that information.
Okay. My other sort of addition to that is once all of these new working entitlements are in place, there is going to be a reduction in that central expenditure to 97%, which is published in the government guidance, isn't it? So is it not better to model going forward on that rather than put in all the services now and then reduce further down the line?
Rachel, I think it's a really good question. In 4.6 in the paper, there's a couple of options in there, about 5% or 3%, or 95 and 97, whichever way you look at that. We've spoken to our counterparts across the region and in a number of other authorities. The vast majority of local authorities are just going straight to 5%. That's what they're doing. So we think we need to put that in as an option. But what we have looked at internally is if we absolutely recognise the pressure that you're under, and we want to flush as much funding out as possible to providers. So we have modelled internally what it would mean as 3% for us, because A, we want it to be sustainable, as you've just picked up already, and B, we want to try and do the very best to get that funding out, but recognising the work that has to go on within the service to be able to support and inform. And obviously those additional numbers Ray's already talked about are massive. So we wanted to give those two options. I think if we give those two options, I'm quite sure what the response will be, but we want to be upfront and honest about those options. We would not be able to safely and effectively deliver the services we need to deliver with all of that new entitlement if we went below 3%. We just wouldn't be able to do it. So we feel that is just about, well, it is doable, it will be tough. So we thought it was the right thing to do to model both of those. That's what we thought from day one. And you've already picked up the point around that sustainability. I don't want to build something and then cut it straight away. That's not going to help anybody.
I'd argue back that personally as my setting, and I know that, you know, lots of other settings are very, very different to myself, but the uplift in administration because of these new schemes is 50% more than what I would be doing, and I've got to fund that myself. So I think actually in terms of, you know, other childminders and other providers as well, that uplift, you know, where do we get that uplift? You know, there's got to be nip and tuck somewhere. I get that and understand that. However, you know, in terms of you know, doing it on the ground, the pressure is actually quite astronomical for us because, you know, I'm having to increase my workload, my staff team because of these schemes, and then to have that cut back again, it might look at me having to make cutbacks that I don't want to do, and then I can't provide those services for the children. So ultimately it leads to a loss of services in the sector, in my opinion.
Rachel, I absolutely get the pressure that you guys are under, and I know it is different, but with a massive increase in entitlement and range and work for us to do as well, I can't say we'll just take that on with a current staffing, because I can't do that. And I can't ask these guys to work the hours they do, but they do it already. I can't keep it. So it's a very similar pressure at a completely different level.
I think
And
it's being considerate of finding the middle
balance.
ground between the two of us.
Absolutely.
That's what I would say,
Yeah.
because, you know, I argued last year here
Yeah.
about you retaining 5%,
Yeah.
and I said, can we meet in the middle? And again, I'm arguing the same thing.
Yeah, and Rachel, that is exactly why. What we didn't want to do today is said with most authorities will put a similar paper in front of their forums that will say we're going to take 5%. That's it. We wanted to show that we are trying to look at different models, and that 3%, having looked at the demands on us, what we know we need to do to support the sector as much as possible as well, to continue the offer that's detailed in this report. That's why we put that 3% in as another option. One of my counterparts, who I wouldn't name, said I'm barking mad for even doing it, but I think it's the right thing to do. And that is partly listening to your concerns last year and listening to the concerns of the sector and recognising that. I don't want to just push for 5%. I think it's the right thing to do to give options.
Okay. I think then just that modelling around what does that look like in terms of money? You know, is it 2p, 5p, whatever, it's going to be a reduction on our base rates. I think then we've got that, you know, real understanding around that. Sorry.
I've got a couple of questions. A couple of questions. One of the things that frustrates me every year that's in every report is that we talk about how important the census data is in terms of how much money we get in, but we know that our census uptake from our providers is really poor. Is there nothing that we can do to put more of kind of an onerous on settings to fill out that census data? Because if they're accessing funding, surely there can be something we're putting in to say, if you don't do your census and help us out as a local authority to capture this data, you're not, you know, it just seems like a really annoying part of the sector. We try every year saying, how can we get more census update? What can we do? But it just never improves. And similarly with the consultation data, a lot of providers aren't doing the consultation. And again, I just wondered if that was something that we could look at.
I mean, what I would say is when providers don't complete the census, we chase them up so that we get everyone to complete it. If they don't complete it subject to that, we wouldn't be funding them. So I don't want you to think that actually we don't chase them, because we do, and we get the right information, but it takes a lot of chasing to get there. Today, you were in the coffee and catch up session this morning. We're trying to streamline that process so that actually we're using our existing early years portal to be able to capture that information, because we are really conscious of the workload that we're feeling and the workload that the sector's feeling. So I think there's a lot about resource and things like that, but in terms of staff capacity, we are pulling up that information for census. The headcount information is key to that. So I don't want you to think that we've got gaps in our information. What happens is when we get the census information, it's a snapshot in spring. But actually, as a local authority, we fund throughout the year. So we've got the summer term where we have our highest take up, which is where the contingency comes in, why we build in that contingency. So we do get that information. It just takes a lot of chasing. But hopefully, with the new mechanism we've got at the moment, they're filling in their head counts to get paid. So therefore, using that same tool to have the census information is going to streamline that. So hopefully we'll see a positive thing from that.
The other thing that I wanted to talk about, and I don't know the answer to it, there's a couple of things in there around, have we looked at how this is going to affect the deprived 2-year-olds? We're going to have a cut in the base rate anyway, because you're going to take, whether it's 3% or 5%, that base rate is going to change. And I'm just worried about how that affects the deprived. I know that you're saying you're going to put in a supplement. We don't know what those rates are. I'm worried that settings are going to start turning these children away. They do come with hidden costs. I'm a setting that sits in a very deprived area. And obviously with the enhancement on the deprivation, I could stand to do really well. However, there is a change in these 2-year-olds, and I'm just worried about kind of how are we considering that for those 2-year-olds? Are they going to start to have nowhere to go, and we're going to start prioritising working families?
That's a really good question. And actually, hence the introduction of the deprivation rate is because what we can see is at the moment, out of our eligible children that we've got about 900, our take-up's about 72%. We'd really like to increase that. And we know that actually there are some hidden, challenges for providers with 2-year-old disadvantage. Maybe one of the things we need to look at is, should the 2-year-old disadvantage only have a supplement? I'm opening it up for a discussion base. We've looked at our data on the kind of current take-up. And in terms of our current take-up on under 2s and 2-year-olds, of the 2-year-olds that we've got at the moment, about 12% would be eligible for the deprivation based on the working entitlements. And of all the entitlements for 2-year-olds, that's a disadvantage on the working, about 18% would be eligible for the deprivation rate. So, I mean, if you feel that maybe we need to look at additional questions, I'm happy to have that discussion, you know, and open up that so that it's a bit more clearer.
I think just so that we're not missing that, because again,
Right,
we
right.
know that this new Labour government, there's lots of things that are coming out in the announcements that we're saying, are we standing children for that gap to get bigger? You know, that actually we already know that these children are going into school lower than their peers, and, you know, we're looking at a trajectory. I think it's something to be considered for the thing. The only other thing I've got is just around the DAF payment. I know you'd said that the take-up's not great for it. We are still getting communication from the EEC funding team that not all of the ages are entitled to it. So I've got an email to say that 2-year-olds aren't entitled to it, whereas we've had it in the past. So there's just a little bit of clarification around that for the sector.
I will look into that, but in terms of disability access funding, all age ranges, it's centrally funded. It's a requirement, just as is EYPP for all age ranges. So I'm re-emphasizing that point, and we'll ensure that we'll communicate that out to the sector. I'm not sure where that confusion could be, but I'll clarify that. Okay.
I just wanted to add actually, our maintain nursery schools, do we have a forum rep? Oh, sorry. Oh, hello. I'm so sorry. There you go. I just, I'm so sorry. Yeah, it was just that it's nice to have a representative here, because I've sort of chatted to other maintain nursery schools. I know a lot of them are on their knees, and you know, with their budgets and things. And that's lovely to see you. Sorry.
I have got some questions if I can. Just in support of what you said, I think the consultation should go out as soon as possible. I don't think we should wait for it, because to understand our funding so late in the year when we're setting 3-year budgets is really hard. So as early as we can get that to come through, the better. With the pass-through, that 5% against all rates, my concern with that is, although, you know, we might see an uplift in the hourly rates coming through from central government, but that won't look as generous if we're then slicing off that top 5%, which for me rings alarm bells. That feels quite frightening. So I think it would be helpful if we could help the likes of me and colleagues to understand how that 5% is used by the local authority, so that we've got some context, because I mean, you're saying there's extra administration, but I completely agree with what these guys are saying over here. The extra administration for us at our settings is phenomenal. So, you know, we need that additional money. When you're aware of our budget situations, we need every penny we can scrape in. So if we can just help to understand in the consultation, do some sort of modelling or bigger explanation as to what that money is used for and needs to be used for, then that might help with understanding, to, you know, to have a balanced view on it as someone sitting in a setting, if you like, rather than just thinking me. What else did I have to say? Have we got any idea on future demand with the new funding coming in from next September as well? So is that something we're able to model?
So at the moment, we're basing that on, it's really hard at the moment because we haven't got a lot of trend data on that. But what we can see from just the codes and that are being issued to families, that actually, and in terms of our validation rates, which are about 89%, we've got what we feel is 50% of that the cohort is taken up, which is quite similar to our take up of the extended entitlement. So it's mirroring that trend. I think our take up for the extended entitlements close to about 56%, but I think it will be very similar to that. And I think we'll model based on that. We've seen an increase from just April for the 2-year-olds to the September take up. It's an increase in about 7% just in that couple of months. So I think with the 30 hours, there is going to be a huge demand, because what that's going to give is parents that flexibility and that stability to make maybe those choices. So as part of the work we're doing within the early education and childcare team is not just the funding side of it and getting ready for that part of it, but also around the sufficiency part of it to ensure that we've got enough places, and some active works being undertaken at the moment to be able to look at how we can use our capital funding to be able to increase that provision. But I'd say that West Northampton has quite, a higher percentage of a working family, so therefore our take-up's going to be very similar to the extended entitlement.
Yeah, thank you. And then around maintain nursery schools specific, this might be a question for the actual consultation rather than here, so please tell me to be quiet if not. Are we expecting any additional funding coming with that, with these additional hours? Because I know when it's a big bone of contention in maintain nursery schools, when the 15 hours then got extended to 30 hours, there wasn't any additional funds that came through with that on the maintain nursery school supplement. Are we expecting to see anything extra coming through on that with these additional? Okay. Okay, but there's nothing at the moment to see. Okay. And is this, so following on from that then, is there an opportunity now to have a look at how that maintain nursery school supplement is distributed? I know we did this piece of work 2 or 3 years ago and made some big changes to how that was distributed, but it's still calculated based on the 3-year-old 15-hour take up.
We're basing it on how it's paid to us.
Okay.
Apart from that small 5% that's based on deprivation. And we don't have any proposals to change that methodology because overall our aim is generally with grants that are specific for a purpose is to pass them on in the way that they're paid to us by government.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Any more questions? Brianna? Go on. Go on,
Sorry,
mate.
I'm back
That's all
again.
right.
Just one of the questions in the consultation around the unspent central budget. Can there be some additional information in there around what that is actually going to potentially offset so that providers are more informed? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, because on the face of it, when you look at the figures, it looks like early years are paying for high needs. Because the government will look at the overall funding and deficits, and that's just simply not acceptable. We can't do that. And again, to keep a close eye on those, whether those distributions happen and whether we end up with a bit more of a surplus on how that can be impacted with any top slice that's taken off, so that it's fed back into the settings. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Rihanna. Andy, high needs update.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to give an update where we are on the non-statutory, the tag descent funding first, and then onto the EHCP funding second, and then 1 or 2 other points, including an update on where we are on FE. We've received a lot of questions, so my update is effectively answering many of the questions that the representative may have heard from their members. We are live on tag descent funding from the 1st of September for the additional money. This accesses the additional £300,000, which was highlighted in the paper in February and then in July. The downside is that we weren't ready with the administration. I think it's important to highlight that where we need to improve, but we have, as a mitigation, continued with the current application form. And the reason for highlighting that point is it means that any school which is making that application can access that money. And as a reminder, the top money was originally £6,000, so it's now £8,000. And also as a reminder to the members, this is now fully aligned to the SEND ranges. So the support's available for 4A, 4B, 5, 6 and 7. And the reason for the delay is purely down to resource, not just resource within the education team, but also resource within the IT team. You may have heard from, let me bring it a little bit closer. Sorry. You may have heard from members, there are some delays in responses regarding funding at this moment in time, which we are trying to address, and members from different teams have been trying to particularly support the education funding team. We've had support from the SAS team, the schools finance team. So we recognise that we didn't plan for the gaps, but when you have long-term sickness, staff vacancies, it's not fallen at the best time for us. I think it's important to highlight that there have been some delays and that we have got a mitigation plan that we're trying to put in place to fix this over the next few weeks. If we come back to the point with regards to the targeted SEND funding, one point that Dan mentioned towards the beginning of the meeting was, has there been effectively a drop off in applications because we've had 40% increase in applications for the EHCP funding. The anecdotal data that I've seen says not, that we're actually continuing to get even more applications, and October is a record month. And I'm happy to bring some data to the next meeting to show how that's running, if that's as an action. If I move to the EHCP funding, I think this is, from a milestone perspective, we now have 85% of the EHCP cohort using the RAS system. So we are measuring the level of need using this system for early years, mainstream schools, units at mainstream schools and special schools. So special schools have been on this system since 2017. And since September, we're now live with the mainstream schools and the other sectors. And to just remind the members, this is aligned with our objective of a consistent, transparent, needs-based system, which goes back to the principles consultation we did in 2023. I've already highlighted the fact that we've had some challenges. I think it's important to bring that to the table from a resource perspective. But we are having some success. We have paid schools. In September, we paid the payment protection. The October payments will go out in the next number of days sometime. I'm looking to my colleagues to the right. October's in the plan. Great, thank you. And so with the payment protection at the July meeting, we did highlight that no schools at total school level with this would lose money. So we are able to say that that's happened. And from the EHCP side, this funding is part of the additional £2.5 million to be spent within this financial year, which I think Emily mentioned earlier. It puts pressure on the overall budget, but it's part of the overall paper. The RAS band appeals was mentioned a few moments ago. Let me just explain for any new members of the forum. The RAS system allocates a RAS banding level between 1 and 10 based on the needs profile within the algorithm. The providers know the children better than we do. And there are a number of occasions where providers have always, since 2017, made applications for appeals. That appeals process has now been expanded to include the schools. And from a numerical perspective, we've had 59 so far. It doesn't mean, as a random number, but it's a lower percentage than we expected. And from our perspective, that we believe that means we've got the RAS band levels more accurate when we then compare to other councils. And I think at one of the meetings, I did say that one of the councils I spoke to was appeals level of 20%. We're currently at 3%, but we are expecting more appeals to come after the October half term based on the new cohort of children. I think Dan asked a question about the appeals process and an independent member. There isn't actually an appeals panel as such. The appeals go through to the funding panel. And there have been changes in the funding panel in recent weeks because that's now, I think it's only the second meeting being chaired by the new Director of Children's Services. So there are some changes to the panel. I can't today say that I'm aware that there is an independent member at this moment in time. I know there's a new terms of reference. And I know that an independent member, sorry, if I address this way, I know the independent member is part of that terms of reference. If I can take that action away from today. I thought there was within the terms of reference, Ben. There has been.
Dan, happy to come back to you with the new terms of reference. As Andy mentioned, we've new Director of Children's Services started a couple of months ago. Partly because of the pressure on the DSG, but partly because of the want to bring greater consistency and clarity around our decision making. Mel has taken the chairing of that meeting. For the interim period, we will have a new head of SEND that will join us in the first week of January. And I think it will be very likely that she will take the lead on that panel going forward. So that would be appropriate. The idea there, as I said, is consistency and clarity. Everything that we always do in this world is transparent, open. So we're obviously talking to our parent forum about their views, and I certainly want school representatives involved as well. But so I'll come back to you with those new terms of reference.
Thank you, Ben. One of the other points which was raised by the parent carers at the previous meeting and at other meetings was the sharing of the needs profile form, which is the output from the algorithm, and sharing of this with the education providers. And I wanted to update Forum that we've sent out these forms to 166 education providers so far. If you look at the mathematics, that doesn't cover all schools, and it is very much schools at this moment we still have to address a relatively small number. I think it's 12 providers within the early years sector. There are 1,800 young people with plans within the schools and early years sector. There are some gaps, and we're now doing an audit to ensure that any of the gaps, we are then sending those out, and then we'll move on and share the same documentation with the special schools. The objective being that all the education providers who have a young person will have the needs profile form, and the needs profile form is the driver of the RAS score. It is a big piece of work. It was something that was approved in the July SEND Improvement Board, so after the last forum, so I wanted to provide an update. And going forward, my colleagues have talked about from the schools consultation, the RAS payments from April 2025-26, that were part of that overall consultation. The numbers I'm talked about and we presented were up to the end of March 2025. And it would be remiss of me not to mention the FE sector. What we highlighted several forums ago was that we'd postponed the rollout for the FE sector to learn more about what's happening from schools and early years perspective. And also it is unique. There are some differences with the other two sectors. Please be assured we are in the process of financial modelling at this moment in time. We're doing exactly the same process as we did for the schools and for the earlier sector. The modelling is taking place based on the July returns, which we've had from the providers. But the July returns don't include all of the current cohort, the new cohort, which is fairly fluid at this time of year in the FE sector. So we'll be doing some further modelling based on the November returns, and the providers have been very supportive of this and are looking to bring the information to us earlier than normal. And the reason for highlighting that to Forum is that we are looking to bring forward the proposals for the FE sector for both what is proposed for the targeted SEND funding and for the EHCP funding at the next meeting in December. And final point, communication is always key with these many topics. In addition to updating Schools Forum, we're using the same standard channels for reaching out to schools and to earliest providers via the portal, via Head West, via networking meetings, Senko updates. I updated a Bursa group, I think Maintain Bursas, was it Beth last week? Maintain Schools Bursas, was that the group? Mainly maintained. And also ensuring that we update the local offer. We update the parent carer forum. So all the information that goes to the providers is also going to the parent carer forum. And last but not least, our partners within the SEND and AP strategy, ensuring that via that mechanism, we're updating healthcare and social care. That's the update. Can I ask if there are any questions, please?
members. Have you got a timetable for the FE? No.
The proposal, yes, we do. The proposal is that we bring the recommendations to the December forum. We are, because there are only a handful of providers, we are looking at a mechanism so that we can do a consultation with that handful of providers and bring the results back through to the February meeting. But in addition to the FE providers, in the same way that we did for the schools, it would also include parent carers and also children and young people, well, young people with SEND. So the timetable is December recommendation and then the February meeting for the results. It is ambitious because of the short window, but the mitigation of that is there are only a handful of providers to reach out to, and we also have already the support from WMVP Parent Care Forum of how we can try to work this through.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so we've worked with Andy and had quite a lot of meetings around this. And we have been quite consistent, I think, with some of our concerns as we've gone forward. Because the FE sector, it's very fluid. So if we look at that start of term, we're looking at significant numbers of education, house and care plans. So this year we've got 320 that we see as enrolled at the moment. And in addition to that, we have around 60, and this is just for the West. Obviously, we work with a number of local authorities that would sit within what you are now describing as targeted SEND funding. So obviously, as a sector, we're a big organisation, so we have a concern about the combination of pressures of late consultations, banded individual plans, and then individual applications for targeted SEND funding. It's going to be a big piece of work. So I think those are the conversations we need to start having about whether we could potentially decouple and delay and phase it to make it manageable for large organisations. Because the main thing here is the students, and what we really don't want is to turn all of our specialist teachers, all of our practitioners, all of our autism support specialists, turn them into administrators until half term because we are processing so much admin. At the moment, our funding agreements work really flexibly so that we are able to put the support in straight away for a significant amount of young people with plans and without plans. And I did want to go back to the point about transition again, because Ben mentioned it, and transition is so important. And at the moment, when we are meeting these young people and their parents, we are able to give them that reassurance that through the local offer and our funding agreement model, we have the flexibility of guaranteeing support for high need students without EHCPs. As we start to meet people now for 25, 26, or how depressing, and we actually don't have that assurance at the moment, so we won't be able to say to these young people, it doesn't matter, we can draw that funding from the local offer, because we actually don't know what it looks like yet. So what we're just asking for in these meetings and discussions, and Andy's working really well with us on this, is let's get this right. Let's not do it too fast, because we're not, in FE as well, those 60 students that we have that are targeted SEND funding, in 2 months' time, a lot of them will have dropped out because we've got them independent, but we've picked up another. So then we've got to apply for those next ones, and you also may have given us funding for the ones that are no longer high needs. So I just think it's a very complex picture that we just need to get right. That's where I am.
I just respond. Thomas, thank you for that. And it's nice to hear that that working relationship is going as well as I certainly feel it is. And I just wanted to say I completely agree with you. We need to do this carefully and once and right, not rush something, which is why we have taken our time, which is why Andy and co are spending so much time speaking to yourself and other colleagues. We want to try and apply similar principles to funding, but I'm very conscious that the way that funding that goes to Rachel and other early years providers and then through our schools and then to FE has to be different because the context is really different. So more than happy that I know you're really heavily involved and really grateful for your involvement as well. Very happy that we get it right and we take it slowly to put it right once. I certainly won't be backing anything that's going to be knee-jerk that we then unpick 12 months or 18 months later. And I do think one of our biggest pressures at the moment is young people leaving statutory education at 16, and particularly a lot of young people who were out of education during those COVID years, except we know we have seen a massive increase in numbers of children not engaged in employment, educational training. And a lot of those young people are reporting to us that their needs, social, emotional, mental health needs, typically mean they do not want a typical FE model. I know Thomas knows this 100 times better than I do. So we do need to think about how we work with wider providers as well to put that right provision on to keep young people going and hopefully get that spark back. Yeah. So very happy that we keep working in the way that we're working, but we will do this in the right way, not in a quick way.
Thanks, Ben. Questions? Ben?
Yeah, sorry, just to refer to one of my previous questions, I think a couple of them were covered off by Andy, so thank you very much. The other question was around minimum funding guarantee. So that was proposed, as I said previously in our previous meeting, around it's a mechanism that's used, Beth, I believe you explained last time, a mechanism that's used for special schools. And obviously then there was a consideration and discussion around how that would be applied or could potentially be applied to DSPs, particularly those that are quite large, because there are some large DSPs there.
Yeah, I was just going to say that perhaps that's a discussion that we could have about adding into the schools consultation, a section on that for the DSPs, if that's something that you'd like to see.
Yeah, I think it's been long-standing, hasn't it? It's not a new discussion point that I'm raising. I know colleagues have raised concerns around what that looks like. I know there was a comment that, you know, and if I refer to 2.7, that schools will have access to increased funding with immediate effect. And Andy, you referred to that no schools will lose out at this moment in time. However, we know, I believe it's 57 schools in terms of the modelling will lose funding come March 25, if my numbers serve me correctly. So is that right? 57?
Yeah, the 100% is until the end of March, and it was 57 was quoted at the previous meeting. However, that was based on the cohort at that time. That number may have changed a little because of movements. With
either way.
Either way.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, if that's possible, I think minimum funding guarantee would be really good to discuss further. I think it's a really relevant point around administration. And Andy, you referred to and acknowledged, so thank you very much, around the change in process regarding targeted funding. But I think it's also worth just noting as well that that's also been applied to the RSA process as well, due to documentation change for both, hasn't it? And I think there is a concern, colleagues, Senko's more specifically, is that there's significant change, and then there's change on top of that in terms of the processes that underpin that. And I think there is a fear across colleagues that Senko's will spend more time either be writing appeals, whether that be looking at the new targeted SEND funding application, or whether that through the RSA process, having to spend more time completing that paperwork than actually working with the young people within our care. So I think that's a really, really valuable point. So thank you very much for sharing that. And then just to be clear, I know that you mentioned this, and this is just for the purpose of the numbers that you obviously just shared. You said it was a relative 3%, I think you said, in terms of appeals. Is that right compared to?
Yeah, but based on the 59 as of yesterday, which we've received, and 1,800 cohorts, it's 3% at this moment in time, which I do believe is on the low side. I do anticipate there will be more to come, but not the 20, which has been quoted by other councils. It's difficult.
I think part of the reason is, Andy, just to kind of interject, I think the reason is because schools have been told that they need to wait till October half term.
Yeah, I think I said that is the new cohort that started in September will push that number further forward.
Yeah.
So the 3% is the cohort as of the last academic year. It's difficult to measure what the future will be when we get to the early parts of November, when we receive the next group through.
Yeah, I think the thing just to mention on that is I understand that in terms of the assess plan, do review, modelling and so on. I understand what underpins that. However, as I'm sure our early years providers will share with us, we sometimes have young people coming in with particular challenges, complex needs, and with the greatest will in the world, 6 weeks, 8 weeks of assess plan, do review isn't going to tell you anything that you don't know within the first couple of days. And I think that possibly is just something that we need to look at when we do have those. And I am talking about a small percentage of complex learners that come in with particular challenges, yet our kind of knee-jerk response or the immediate response is, well, let's wait till October half term. And I think actually all we're doing then is we're then going into part-time timetables, we're putting pressure on families, and not being able to provide the education which those young people deserve. So I think when there are those complex cases, then there needs to be a mechanism in order to be able to access that support when needed, because ultimately we want those children in school, they just need the right support. Thank you very much.
We'll take that point away, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Rachel.
Sorry, can I just add to what Dan's saying? I think there's more work to do with early year settings when they're going into primary. If they're at that level that we're, you know, that first term or the first couple of days, they're requiring, you know, an RSA and an EHCP, you know, how come the early year setting didn't pick that up? And actually, it shocks me to hear only 12 providers have children with EHCPs in their setting. I know 2 of them are sitting here. So I think that is something that needs to be continually worked on.
Can I clarify the 12, if you don't mind? It was 12 12 at the start of the term. The number does increase. And I think we were talking about the needs profile form. So on top of that, you've got any new providers where these young people have got plans. I think there's another 4 or 5, but it is a number which is less than 20. And I checked that the other day. It is lower to 500 providers. Or the exact number that there was additional to add to the 12, which is new plans which have been issued since the beginning of September, which I think was 4.
Thank you, Ben.
Rachel, I think I'm sharing the concerns that you're articulating, that about identification and assessment at the earliest possible stage. One of the challenges that I know we have, and I say that the royal we, not me, it's what Dan's raising, it's what other people are raising. It's very often children that haven't been in an early years setting, or children that are either new to the area or sometimes new to the country, that suddenly do arrive on day one and walk in, and you don't have that context behind that young person. And I know certainly from a group of schools that I'm working with at the moment around children in year R, who are all in that cohort, they have not been in an education setting at all, and their behaviour is, and their needs are far more extreme than I've seen. There's one school in particular with 3 children in reception. I've never seen one child with that level of need in a reception class ever. There are 3 in the same class. There's nothing that any of us in this room can do there apart from try to encourage families to get into early years provision as early as possible, which obviously we're all doing. But I do take the point, and Rachel, you know, you and I have talked about this many times before. What I want to do is try and support and empower all early years providers to be able to do that early identification, assessment, and make sure that that transition is as smooth as possible into school. So we try and reduce that number as quickly as possible. And on that wider point around when young people do arrive, and it's not just in year R, it can be at any year, can't it? I've worked in local areas before where we've developed assessment centres that work alongside schools. We don't have anything like that here yet. I would be really keen to get people's views about how that might work. So we very quickly get an assessment of need and an idea of what type of provision is needed immediately to meet those needs of that child, and then stop those needs escalating. And we know that's what we're seeing at the moment. So there's a lot to do. The knowledge of people around this room and wider across our sector will help us get that right, I think. You've sat forward, Rachel. That looked like you were being very sort of... Rachel, very keen, particularly with our specialist teachers who have got between them 100 years or so worth of that expertise, and the manager that's coming in to support them. That's exactly the sort of area I'm asking them to look at. How can we best do this? What good practice can we borrow from other areas, and two of those people have come from other areas and brought loads of different practice to us. That's the sort of work exactly that I want us to focus on, because that will make a huge difference. And that will alleviate a lot of the pressure for that individual child, but also for whole settings and for that whole cohort that they're with. That's exactly where we need to be.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Any more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much, Andy, if we note the report. If I can move on then to the forward plan. Has everyone had a chance to have a look at what's in there? Is there anything you think is missing or that we need to discuss further or bring in, particularly from today's discussions? I think most of the standing items and our agenda items from today are covered.
I think, Chair, just to highlight, it will be a different experience for the forum, because in relation to the decision on decisions following consultation, it will be doing one meeting in December, what it normally does across 2 meetings in December and then February in previous years. And so December's meeting with those 2 items, and by the sound of it, the FE, the proposals on higher needs to do with the FE sector, that will be quite a meaty meeting. Oh, and just to add as well, I've had apologies for absence whilst the meeting's been in progress from John Lake.
Thank you.
Chair, can I just add a suggestion? James is right, December's going to be heavy, but someone promised to bring mince pies, so we'll get through the December bit. I personally think in February, it would be very worthwhile us collectively reflecting on whatever is in the national budget and whatever changes do come at national level. And I think we will start to see, we should start to have a bit more clarity about that by, it's the 4th of February, so obviously papers will be ready by the middle of Jan. I would also like to update there, and I don't know exactly what detail yet, but about our early engagement with the ESFA around our recovery plan to DSG and what expectations are being put on us as a local area and exactly where we are on that. And that will be our new officer, Joe Headley, who's pulling that all together. That would be an appropriate time, I think, for her to come and talk through exactly what she's finding and some of her recommendations as well, if that's okay.
Yep, no, that sounds good. Anyone, anything else you'd like added on the agenda, or no? Okay, so any other business? I haven't been advised of any other business. So with that, I will close the meeting and thank you all very much for your attendance in person and online. Thank you very much, everyone.